Okay, I'm just taking all of you in, having a little look at all of you. Good. Yeah, thank you very much, Subhadramati. Thank you for that lovely introduction and also the recap of where these sequence of teachings have led us up to. So I just want to tell you very, very simply about Padmasambhava and cremation grounds. We have this picture, this image of Padmasambhava here, dressed in his boots, his robe, his cap with its vulture's feather. But Padmasambhava is depicted in many, many ways. Yeah, so this is one particular sort of manifestation, depiction of Padmasambhava. Sometimes, and very often actually, you get Padmasambhava seated in a cremation ground, naked on a mat, either made of human skin or tiger skin. And there's sort of bones everywhere because it's a cremation ground. And then there are Dakinis surrounding him. Yeah? So this is really tame. So before his enlightenment, Padmasambhava would seek out Dakinis in cremation grounds. He would go to the cremation grounds to find the Dakini, to be given an initiation. So he'd ask a Dakini for an initiation. And then afterwards, he would also continue to visit cremation grounds to practice there. So I was just wondering, how many people have been to a cremation ground? Yeah? Okay, so quite a few. How many people have seen a cremation? Okay. That's also quite a few, but also quite a few of you haven't. So I've seen two cremations. One was my grandfather, and he died when I was about 11 years old, and he was cremated. In Malaysia, where I come from, if you're rich, you get a burial plot. But if you don't have very much money, you get cremated. And my mother's family was quite poor, so my grandparents on my mother's side were cremated. In Malaysia, it doesn't sort of happen in open air. We took his coffin, his body in his coffin, into a room, which is about the size of from just about here to that wall, and roughly as tall. And his coffin was on a plinth of some sort, and we lit it. And each of us had one stick of quite fragrant wood to add to the pyre. And then when it was really sort of like going, then we just exited that small room. And then the 2 days afterwards, we went and collected the bones. More recently, though, my grandmother died, and we didn't see the cremation because by this time it was much more slick. Instead of having a whole room to burn the coffin in, there were these ovens, so they're about this size. And there was like a whole row of them with trays and trolleys leading up to the ovens. I really particularly remember going to collect the bones afterwards in that particular crematorium. Even though it was a Buddhist crematorium, it was used by the whole community, so you didn't have to be Buddhist to be cremated there. And I particularly remember that morning when we went to collect my grandmother's bones, there was some Hindu rites going on alongside, and a little Hindu funeral going on one side. And then on the other side, it was quite striking actually, because there was this tray with bones, and my mother said to me, "Oh, I think that's quite a young person because the skeleton's really intact," but it didn't have anyone attending to that tray. Not just that it didn't have anyone attending, it also didn't have a picture. Usually there would be a picture of whoever it was, whose body it was. And then we went up to my grandmother's bones, so the coffin had been on a tray, it had all been burnt, so it's just ashes and bones. My mother was sort of telling me about osteoporosis and very matter of fact. And then we had this ritual where we got the urn out and we were all given chopsticks and we had to pick up the bones to put into the urn with chopsticks. And I don't really use chopsticks anymore these days, so I was really nervous. Don't drop my grandmother's bones. It was much worse for my husband because he didn't even grow up using chopsticks. He had to, pick up Popo's bones and put it into the urn. So that whole day was a very, very bright, sunny day. And I could see past the ovens, there was a Bodhi tree. It was quite a small one, but it had these beautiful heart-shaped leaves. A really, really lovely sunny day, but not hot. And the crematorium that my grandmother's ashes are stored. It was a very sort of like bright, kind of like happy place, It was just quite matter of fact. And yeah, the whole family was there and we're just sort of telling stories about my grandmother. So although I don't have a sort of, I don't sort of see cremation or crematoriums or cremation grounds as difficult places to be. I do wonder what it would have been like had I been there alone at midnight or even at dusk, how that would be. I was thinking, I think partly my mother wasn't repulsed or scared by the bones or the ashes of her mother, so I wasn't. And I do wonder with these things, like whether it's our relationship to it that defines our reaction. Okay, so I'm just going to leave that story there now and talk a bit more about cremation grounds in the tradition. So cremation grounds are places of death. They're places that symbolize impermanence. Sometimes they also symbolize uncanny, magical places. I don't know how many of you are native speakers. I read a lot of science fiction and fantasy, so uncanny means something like slightly scary, slightly magical. Yeah, there are situations in which quite major transformations, of like life-changing transformation happens. They often symbolize places or situations where the old version of us, of me, of the situation, cannot continue to exist, must die, must change, so that something new, something else, something different can come into being. So, in thinking about cremation grounds for myself, I just wanted to sort of call forth or illustrate three kinds of cremation grounds. They're not traditional at all, but I thought I'd just sort of structure the talk in this way. First of all, I think there are cremation grounds that erupt into our lives, yeah? Sort of situations that perhaps we weren't expecting, weren't prepared for. And they sort of erupt and they come in and they don't leave. So you could think that the pandemic, where life seemed to pretty much change overnight, very, very suddenly, very dramatically, as a kind of like, cremation ground in practice, yeah? So in the pandemic, I imagine that for most of us, our ideas of life were challenged. Some of us weren't able to go to work. When you can't go to work, like some of us might have had this sort of, who am I then? Who am I if I can't work? We would have had to cancel our plans. I just really remember that. It's like I have a Google Calendar and just deleting all these different, particularly the recurring meetings. I just kept feeling like next week that meeting will have next week, and just like canceling them. And the pandemic, I think, particularly if you're practicing Buddhism, perhaps even if you weren't, there was a sort of situation that really showed up our practice. How much can you be with what is? Yeah, how much can you be with what is? Really, what is the extent of your loving kindness practice? What is the extent of your compassion practice? There was a chance to really, really see how we respond when the ground is sort of whipped away from underneath our feet. It's not just a pandemic, we might have had experiences of loss, maybe a relationship that was quite important, broke up, perhaps death of somebody who's very close to us, or perhaps not even that close to us, just an unexpected death. So maybe this might be something that you want to discuss in your groups, cremation grounds that erupt into your life. And then what happened next? How did we respond? How did you respond? But for practitioners, cremation grounds don't just happen to us. We can go and seek them out. Yeah? So we can go searching for cremation grounds to plunge ourselves into. Sangharakshita, Bhante Sangharakshita, whose burial mound is outside on the grounds, He defines cremation grounds as crucial situations into which you deliberately plunge yourself in which you must either develop or die. Yeah. Yeah. And I was thinking that one cremation ground that all of you have chosen to enter is this retreat. You may not have known that when you booked, but this retreat could be, if you dare, be a cremation ground for you. And it might be, in quite sort of small, mundane ways. For example, some of us might not have shared a room with anyone ever in our lives. Some of us might never have meditated for more than 10 minutes, or in a situation where you feel like you can't easily leave the room or shuffle around. Some of us might have not ever meditated without music, for example. I was talking to somebody a few days ago, and they were telling me that they're a social animal eater. They eat animals with other people, but not if they're by themselves. And I was just wondering, maybe for some of you, that just the food, the diet, is unusual. Yeah. It's out of your comfort zone. But also, we can take the retreat as a cremation ground when we turn up to our meditation cushions. Turning up without any sort of trying to loosen our view of what might happen in each meditation, trying to be open to whatever might arise. That could be a way of entering the cremation ground more fully on this retreat. I must say, actually, even for us on the team, we're on retreat too, and I certainly have felt in situations of transformation on this retreat myself. One of the things I've been reflecting today is sort of how fortunate I am to be on retreat with other order members, particularly ones who are much, much more experienced than me, who have been practicing far longer than myself. And for me, that's actually culturally very, very challenging. In the culture that I come from, it's positively rude to be standing up here teaching in front of one's teachers, and there's this sort of Tibetan saying that to teach in front of the Dalai Lama is like lighting a match to see by when you're standing in the middle of the noonday sun. Yeah, and it's a little bit like that. Even for me, it's a little bit like. I don't want to let my teachers down. I also don't want to embarrass myself. Yeah. But we can't be on retreat all the time. Yeah. So retreat might be a cremation ground a new job might be a cremation ground, a new living situation might be a cremation ground, but we can't sort of do that all the time. So another way that we can call forth or enter a cremation ground is on a much, much more day-to-day, moment-to-moment level. And this will really depend a little bit more on what you're like and what you're working with, the edge of your practice, if you like. So I know for me that apologizing that I did something wrong, I made a mistake, or I didn't know something, like these things can be quite hard to admit. I don't know if other people find that. Earlier in the retreat, Danayutta was teasing the whole retreat about how we always think we know, even if we have a little bit of information, and that how the pandemic has made us all virologists and epidemiologists. So rather than saying something confidently, or rather than sort of glossing over a mistake or something rude that you might have inadvertently said, can we apologize, or can we admit that we don't know? And I was thinking that actually a lot of, I don't know how many of you are in study or how many of you have working lives, but I was thinking that probably contemporary working life doesn't encourage this attitude of I don't know. Yeah. I currently work in a Buddhist team, and I just really, really value work as practice. I just sort of rejoice on my boss for a moment. He's also in the order, and I find him very, very unusual. He's a director of a big charity, a sizable charity, and he's the person who I think is fastest at apologizing of anyone in the team, of quite a lot of people who I know. It's very unusual, isn't it? Usually, like the higher up you go, the less people want to admit they're wrong or to apologize. And you know what it's like to apologize. It feels uncomfortable. It feels as if you're going to lose something. Yeah. But if we can apologize, that is us transforming. Yeah. Or even just saying, I don't know. Let me see. I've been reflecting a bit about, my first retreat. And it was around the time of the financial crisis, and my job was just making financial instruments that were tradable. And it was like the height of the financial crisis, and they had just fired all the senior guys in my team. And the trader came up to me and said something along the lines of, do you know how to make financial bonds out of like Greek airport landing rights? Well, I just said, no. I don't know. And what I got back was like half an hour lecture, which is a very, very long time on the trading floor. Like half an hour is a long time. It's like long half-hour lecture about how I need to act like I know. You need to act like you know. They even had an acronym for it, ALEC, act like you know. Which is great for bonuses, terrible for spiritual growth, yeah? Padmasambhava has got this has got this line, this teaching attributed to him. And it goes, let these three expressions, I do not have, I do not understand, I do not know, be repeated over and over again. This is the heart of my advice. Yeah? So let these three expressions, I do not have, I do not understand, I do not know, be repeated over and over again. That is my heart advice. Another way of another sort of example, I guess, of these day-to-day cremation grounds might be noticing when we're in a bad mood or disappointed or upset, because these are signs that we're in slight discordance with reality, or these could be signs that we're in slight discordance with reality. And that just means that growth and transformation is just around the corner. We can change, yeah, in those moments. And then for some of us, a really, really difficult cremation ground would be doing nothing. doing absolutely nothing. We will be going deeper and deeper into silence. And what you might find deeper and deeper into silence is that labels, like shampoo bottle labels, peanut butter labels, soya sauce labels, especially the gluten-free version, becomes more and more interesting. So for some of us, a cremation ground would be letting go of our addiction to input. Yeah. Okay. And I think it is really important to work at the edges of our comfort zone, at least from time to time. If we don't work at the edges of our comfort zone, if we don't sort of explore the edges of our comfort zone, what can happen is our comfort zone shrinks, and we end up living smaller and smaller lives. But if we are able to sort of work to the edge, explore the edge from time to time, when we're resourced enough, when we're robust enough, when the conditions are good enough, then we'll live more expansive, creative, open lives. Life will be able to naturally unfold more and more. Okay. So Padmasambhava goes to cremation grounds. He seeks them out. And in cremation grounds dwell Dakinis. So the word Dakini in Tibetan is kandroma. And that is usually translated as sky goer or sky dancer. Yeah? So Dakinis dance in the sky. They inhabit infinite space. I really, really like this image of space and sky, partly because in the sky you can move in any direction. Yeah. In early Buddhism, you get this refrain, there are no tracks in the sky. Another refrain that you get is, how will you track him, the trackless one? So the Buddha is the trackless one. How will you track him, the trackless one? So when you can dance in the sky, you can move in any direction. You're not sort of bound by any particular pathway. And remember that Dakinis are beings that are made of light. So it's not just that they can move in like 3 dimensions. They can move in any dimension. They can move outwards, inwards, and through time, at least in my imagination. Okay. They're also bright, bright red. I imagine them to be sort of brighter red than this. This is a little bit orangey. In my imagination, they're like blood red, the color of blood. When you prick your finger or get a cut, that deep irony red color. They also have really big disheveled hair. And I think of this red and this sort of like lots of hair as an upwelling of energy and inspiration. So they're full of passion and they're full of feeling and emotion. This bright redness stands for an intense emotional engagement with spiritual life. So I think often people come to Buddhism thinking that, it's a very, very peaceful, forgiving religion. That, it's a bit like we need to cultivate more and more detachment, and that Buddhism's a little bit, sort of like beige and undangerous. But it's not at all like that. It's not at all like that. Rather than trying to be more and more detached, I think what happens is that detachment arises from wisdom. So we don't detach in the sense of like cutting off parts of ourselves, cutting off, energies that we don't like, cutting off people who we don't like. I think detachment arises from wisdom, a kind of deep empathy, a deep understanding, a kind of sympathy with human life, like so sort of open and sympathetic that you don't take things personally. And I think practice also makes us bigger containers, yeah? So bigger containers for our emotions. We become more sensitive and more in touch with our emotions and other people's emotions, but practice also brings with it robustness and sort of being bigger, more expansive, so that we can hold our experience without, I don't know, metaphorically, like sort of slushing over and hurting other people and ourselves in the process, yeah? So we grow in capacity to engage with the totality of our emotions and to engage with other people's emotions and energies. We learn not to react, to be in wise relationship to our experience and to the world. And we we sort of gather our energies behind our highest values. I think that's what practice really gives us. It gives us a sense of what the higher values might be, and also a way to gather ourselves behind it and move wholeheartedly towards our values. So Dakinis also traditionally are completely naked, and they wear bone ornaments. And nakedness represents this complete receptivity and fearlessness. Now, I've really been thinking that I think for me, what keeps me sort of fixed in this sense of me and the sense of the world is this fear. And it can be quite subtle, because if somebody just asked me, "Are you afraid of other people?" I would say no. But just when I come off retreat, I notice that I'm not. Yeah, I don't subtly shrink away from people on the central line. I'm sort of much more open and interested. It's almost like I don't worry that somebody else is going to say something that I can't handle. I'm much happier talking to people who might look a bit unusual or edgy. And of all my years of coming on retreat and practicing and maybe just this thing of being alive, I feel that what we all truly want is a deep sense of intimacy with other people, a deep sense of intimacy with life, I think. We want to be in close connection with other people, even though we might go about it in quite strange ways. So I think the Dakinis' nakedness stands for this fearlessness, and metta is loving kindness for herself and for other people. Yeah. Maybe in your groups tomorrow you might want to say or discuss or think about, what is it that keeps you separate from others. I think the Dakinis' bone ornaments are also very, very interesting. Generally, ornaments on Buddhist figures are trying to sort of express an inner experience, sort of like an outer manifestation of an inner experience. The Dakinis often wear a big mala, a big sort of garland of either skulls or freshly severed heads. And it's not even your sort of average mala that ends somewhere along your chest. They often depict it like, around the ends of around her knees. But actually, probably, and Maestro Bandhu and I was just talking about this, is an infinitely long garland of severed heads. So I think, it is quite interesting what it is that we adorn ourselves with. What we choose to wear. It's usually trying to say something about ourselves, what we, like this gold chain, these dangly earrings, the shape of our spectacles, what sort of jumper or, whatever it is that we're wearing. Usually we're trying to express part of our identity, or if we're feeling particularly insecure, trying to shore up a sense of me, yeah? I'm this sort of person and I'm not that sort of person. And it can be positive for a while. We do need to have a healthy sense of self. We do need to have a healthy sense of self. But sort of more deeply, more intimately, each of us will have habitual ways of being that keep us small, that keep us from being free. That sort of things that we do, personality traits or habits that we've just developed over our many years of life, that keep us from being wiser and more loving, that keep our energies blocked. Yeah? And that is what we die to. That's what these severed heads sort of represent. As we practice, we're trying to completely let go of everything that keeps us from awakening. And I think it's really interesting that this is what she chooses to adorn herself with. Sometimes I think adornment is even the wrong word. In my imagination, the Dakini as sky dancer is sort of shooting upwards through a garland of skulls, yeah? So she's not that she's just like wearing it, she's sort of like leaping through it. Okay. So I just want to say one little word of warning, a little caveat, which is don't forget that these are enlightened figures, yeah? So she's not just like this bright red woman with big hair and unusual jewelry, yeah. These are enlightened beings. And again, you might just want to think about that a bit more. So finally, I just want to say something about Dakini as Sangha refuge, yeah? So the Dakini represents the esoteric Sangha refuge, which, again, if you're not familiar with these terms, I'll just give you a quick definition or a quick explanation. It's a manifestation of the principle of spiritual community in our lives, yeah? And I just think that the shrine is quite interesting, that Padmasambhava is flanked by the Dakini. When Padmasambhava as Vajraguru, when there is a Vajraguru, Dakinis will gather round. When there is a teacher, a Sangha can form, something like that. But as a sort of a manifestation of spiritual community in our life, the Dakini could be somebody whose company we find really stimulating, who sparks off and releases our energy in pursuit of spiritual life. It could be somebody who inspires us, who draws us out. But it's probably better to say that the energy of the Dakini can manifest in our lives when real communication at the deepest level occurs. Their presence wakes us up. It sort of ignites in us energy for spiritual life. It gets us moving. So Vajramati was talking about my very first winter retreat. And actually in the library building, in the gallery, there's a picture of me with a quote from an interview that I did. And it says something like, "And then she showed me the Buddha, and then I felt fine." And the she in that quote is Subhadramati. Yeah. So I turned up at this winter retreat, really not knowing what I was doing. And in those days, we held a winter retreat at a boarding school. So it's quite different from this in some ways. The beds were smaller. The room smelled very, very slightly unpleasant. But also sweet. I remember that year I had a room where it had glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. It was just very, very sweet as well. So I did turn up in the lounge, not quite knowing what to do, and these two order members came to talk to me. One of whom was Subhadra Mati. I didn't know she was in the order then. And then she just said, "Would you like to go and see the Buddha?" And then I just said yes, I would. And she took me to the shrine room, which in those days was in the school hall. And that was what happened. I saw the Buddha and I felt fine. And I have asked Subhadra Mati, more recently, like why she did that, because that's not the usual sort of protocol, if you like. Like people stay in their rooms and then gather in the lounge and have tea and hopefully chat to each other and make friends with each other. But she showed me the Buddha. And when I asked her a few years ago now, she said, "I don't know. It just felt like the thing to do." Yeah. So I think that is Dakini in her fascination mode. Yeah. So the Dakini is also closely related to this rite of fascination, a tantric rite of fascination. We don't have a depiction of curricula on the shrine, but she's a particular Dakini that has a lasso, or if you're American English speaker, a lasso, that is made out of flowers. So a garland of flowers with which she throws around beings and draws them in. She also has a hook, by the way, which is also made out of flowers to hook them in. Yeah. So Dakini in fascination mode. But also, later, after I got ordained, I think it was quite soon after I got ordained, I was asked to lead a retreat with somebody who I, at that time, wasn't that sure of. And I was in a bad mood about it before, during, and after the retreat. Anyway, it was a cremation ground that I didn't recognize as a cremation ground, and just stayed going, "This is not a cremation ground. It's everyone else's fault." Yeah. Anyway, Subhadra Mati heard about it because I complained so much. She took me on a walk. And at the end of the walk, so I remember it was the end of the walk because we were just about to get back to the LBC where we were both working at that time. And we were walking past the florist pub. And she said, "Danayutta, I think your next step is to be a better friend to people." I remember that so clearly, just as I remember her saying, "Would you like to go and see the Buddha?" I remember these two moments so clearly. And that moment for me when she said, "I think your next step is to be a better friend," was completely shattering. It was burning. You see, these Dakinis, they're surrounded by a halo of flames, and that was what it was like. It's oh no, she's seen that this is what I'm not good at, and has told me what to do about it. Okay, and I think that's Dakini in destruction mode, the tantric rite of destruction. It's burning up unskillfulness, burning up whatever keeps me from being more loving. So, it's not that Subhadra Mati is a Dakini all the time, but Dakinis, or the spirit of a Dakini can arise in communication when it's real communication. Yeah? Okay. So on a retreat that's as big as this, it's very, very easy to keep things on the surface. If you like, you could have the same conversation over and over again. The same kind of networky chat over and over again. Is this your first retreat? Where are you from? What do you do? Not that any of you have done that, of course. But on a retreat like this, you can also risk a real conversation. Yeah, you can risk a real conversation. You can risk looking at the other person and really meeting their gaze. You can risk. Yes, I'm not saying that you should reveal yourself completely to everyone. That's not what I'm saying. But I am saying that you can take a risk and say something that's real. Yeah? I think I've been also thinking quite a bit about communication exercise recently. I think there's something to do with the pandemic and how we haven't actually, for many of us, seeing people and being around a lot of people is an unusual situation. So I think communication exercises at the moment have a particular power. They help us, they allow us to really start to meet another person's gaze. And when we hold another person's gaze, when we allow ourselves to be seen, to be looked at, when we really try to take somebody in, not just with our eyes, but with our heart, with the whole of our being, something else can happen. At the start of the communication exercise, usually there's this strong sense of me. Ooh, I don't know about this person. Why did I sit next to them? Or just sense of like, oh no, did I put my makeup on? Is my mascara running? Or there's this strong sense of like, don't know, fear. And also, there's a strong sense of the other. Yeah, there's a strong sense of that person over there. I wonder what they think of me. Or, oh no, they're just like not really looking at me. What does that mean? Yeah. So we start off not a little bit unsure, but as the exercise takes place, something different can come into being if we allow it to. If we allow it to, the sense of me can sort of quieten down, and the sense of them over there can quieten down as well. And it's not as if you merge. It's not like I and them become a we in this kind of like slightly sentimental way. It's not, that isn't really quite what happens. Something else happens. You're in relationship with the other person. The borders aren't quite so hard. And also you're in connection with the rest of the room. And rather than sort of blending and merging in a kind of, trying to find the average sort of way, we actually feel more alive, yeah? Some of us have had experiences of crying, weeping, or just really laughing, and joy manifesting. We feel more alive when we're in communication. Okay. So I think what I just want to say is, by way of finishing, is to tell you a little story and then say what I wish for all of you, which is, on that very same winter retreat that I first came on, I found it very, very difficult to settle after the changeover day. So I was there for 10 days. I found the changeover quite difficult, having quite a difficult time, uncomfortable, didn't quite settle. And there was somebody on this retreat, I don't even remember his name now, he was just very kind to me, and he just took an interest in me. And he told me that he was an illustrator. And on that retreat, I had rediscovered drawing. And I've been drawing on this retreat, and I told him that I've been drawing, and I asked him if he'd like to have a look. So I showed him this image of myself that I had drawn, and I drew myself meditating from behind. And he looked at it, and he looked at it for quite a long time. And he said, "That's really nice, it's really good, but why have you drawn yourself naked?" Yeah. Anyway, I just love to leave you with that image. But I think, actually I won't leave you with that image because I do want to say something about it. I think there's something about that, I think I was trying to express a longing. Like, I do want to be completely undefended, in a position that I don't have to defend. And the only position that you don't have to defend is, yeah? Okay. So I really hope for all of you that you have the right conditions, the right kind of, resources, I guess, to enter the cremation ground, on this retreat, and to continually step into the cremation ground. And I hope for you that Dakinis appear.